So, Dean, one of the innovations in microfinance is trying to figure out a way to reach further down the poverty ladder with a program that's generally referred to as graduation or targeting the ultra poor. Could you tell us a little bit about what those programs are and the process of figuring out whether they work?
Sure. So the first thing I think that's important to note is in the broad scope what the goals are. Brock in Bangladesh is a micro-lender who kind of was an early group thinking about these issues. But in a very simple way, this really has absolutely nothing to do with microfinance. This is about how you help the ultra-poor build up a livelihood. It's recognizing that micro-lending, despite its rhetoric, has never really reached those people. That has never been a satisfactory tool, not only for reaching them, but for lifting them out of poverty when it does reach them. But in a sense, this really is an issue which has just that. It has nothing to do with microfinance, or in terms of the way we should be thinking about it. We should be thinking about it as, what do you do with households that are so poor that there is no real sustainable livelihood going on, that they are having to live hand to mouth, and not always hand to mouth because they don't always have the food, and they don't have the skills, and they don't have the information, and they don't have a way of getting out of this trap, this poverty trap basically, because there's really no reasonable access to credit that can reach them. And so really what this program did is started off by saying the way we're going to solve this it's not a matter of giving them a loan. First of all, the risk of repayment is too high, and odds are they probably don't even want the loan. The thought of dealing with a formal institution like this is too scary and too outside of their normal context. So let's take a big push approach. Let's give them 4 goats. Let's give them training in how to raise those goats. Let's go and monitor and make sure that the goats are being taken care of and that they're raising them the way they need to raise them. Let's give them consumption support, a weekly bag of rice or a monthly bag of rice and beans, so that they can use that money to eat and not sell the goat in order to eat. Mm-hmm. Let's give them a savings account. Let's provide them health care. So it's really a big push, which is wonderful from a program perspective in the sense that there's lots of reasons and theories to suggest that all of these components are necessary. It's honestly horrible from a learning perspective in that it's quite reasonable to think that all of these components may have not been necessary, and there might be a couple of them that are really expensive and you could do without and then service more people. Mm-hmm. So this is one of the struggles that these projects have had, and so we've set up 7 randomized trials on this idea, but all 6 of them are all testing out the package versus a control, which is great for establishing the base case, that whether or not this is a successful idea, but is horrible for understanding the inside and outs of or why it's going to work, or why it does work. In Ghana, we do have a setting, which we're very excited about, in which we are teasing out some of the components. So there's a group of people, for instance, that are just getting the asset transfer. Here's the 4 goats. We're going to bring you out of this poverty trap in one fell swoop, but do nothing more. Is that sufficient? Is sufficient to just get you out of the trap? And so we don't have results on that yet, but we will, when they're out, we'll be excited to come back here and share them with you.
So, one of the standard questions always about randomized controlled trials is internal validity versus external validity. Doing 7 different sites in 7 different places around the world would seem to go a long way to answering that external validity, depending on how varied the results are. There's this curious thing, though, too, that it's at some level, if all the results seem the same in very, very different contexts, that would also be puzzling. That shouldn't, for people this poor in Ethiopia versus Honduras, shouldn't things work a little differently?
Yes and no. It's not. First of all, some of the results that are coming out are strikingly similar. This reason we're doing it in 7 places is not about external validity. The thing that I think is not well understood is that when we do randomized trials, we're doing them in order to improve the internal validity of what we can learn in a particular situation. There's no harm done to external validity by doing a randomized trial. You don't lose external validity. You don't gain any. You gain internal validity. When you have stronger internal validity, you have more confidence in the results there. And so if you want to go somewhere new and ask the question whether the results in this other place can and should be used over here, you should be asking in this first place whether those results were internally valid as a first starting point, and so that's, the RCT helps on that. And then you need to ask, well, what's the theory as to why this worked? What are the contextual factors that are important? And if those apply, then it should apply over here. Right? And that's the external validity question. And you get that from having an understanding of the context and having a theory as to why this is working. Right? But having randomized variation in one particular way that something was done neither helps nor hurts when it comes to external validity. So the reason for doing 7 is more about persuasion, is more about politics, and is more about variety in terms of the organizations that are doing the work, in order to be able to come up with a preponderance of evidence across these different types of organizational structures. And seeing whether it systematically can have this type of impact. So in that sense, there is an external validity question that is gained, but it's gained by being able to say, look, here was government, here was an NGO, here was not. But at the end of the day, let's say the NGO site works and the government site doesn't. I'm going to be really hard pressed to sit back and tell you, well, okay, I have this now theory that just says NGOs are better at doing it than government, when there's other factors that are going to be at play that are going to drive success in one place versus another. So to get at those types of issues, one of the first things you need to do is have better monitoring data, so that we can really say concretely when one site has a more success than another, how much of this was due to the actual differences in implementation of the different site versus some underlying theory about the type of constraints that the ultra-poor are facing.
Now, one of the other interesting things about the differences between the programs is that in some of them, you're evaluating not just economic well-being, you're evaluating psychological well-being. How is that being evaluated?
So this has become fairly commonplace in a lot of impact evaluations that are particularly working with the ultra-poor, to the extent that stress and depression are important manifestations of being poor. We want to understand how are these things changing alongside other more traditional economic outcomes. And so we've been learning a lot from the psychology literature about how to measure things like depression and stress. We were hoping in some sites to actually use biomarkers. We have not managed to do that yet, but we're using surveys that are batteries of questions that are basically measures of depression and stress and locus of control and other types of well-being measures. And some of the results so far are actually showing striking impacts, positive, on depression. So it's a very, very exciting result to see, because ultimately when there has to be a little bit of realism in any sort of intervention. We're not gonna ever take the ultra poor and make them rich. And so when we think about what we're really trying to do in any sort of social policy is increase utility. And so in that sense, I'm particularly a big fan of looking at measures of depression, because it's a pretty clear way of looking at a left tail of utility, which is ultimately what we care about. Utility being economist jargon for happiness.
When will results start to come out?
So some results have started to come out, but it'll probably be about 2 years before we see the full set. I think that's about right.